Hello and welcome to Troubleshooting Zen Study and Practice, number 52. And this month, the following question. As a complete beginner to Zen, can you give me some tips for starting a Zen practice? Well, this is obviously a subject we've dealt with previously and certainly in other forms. There's quite a lot of material on the Zen Gateway itself for how to start off a Zen practice, but it's a common enough question and new people are coming in all the time. And one of the great things is that the what's known as the going back to basics, the fundamentals, which are really the same practice all the way through right to the very end, are always worth going over, because even for seasoned practitioners, it's very easy to forget some of those fundamentals because there's so many facets and angles to Buddhism. We can sort of get somewhat lost in a labyrinth. And I remember when I first started out in Buddhism, which would have been back, coming up towards, well, not that, in the late 20 years anyway, not just a little bit shy of 30 years still, but yes, probably about 27 years ago. I remember going to the Buddhist Society in London, and they're going along to the Fundamentals of Zen class. And one of the really refreshing things about Zen, because I'd done quite a lot of reading about all forms of Buddhism really, but particularly about Zen, and I'd read these very peculiar stories of the Zen masters, and I'd read something about Zen koans, and I'd even done a Zen retreat actually at that point up in Throstle Hole in Northumbria. But I wasn't actually clear exactly what else I was supposed to do. I knew there was something about Zazen. That was a sort of easy bit because it was something very specific that you just sort of sat down and sort of did. Maybe not very well, to be honest, but that was it. But I felt there was sort of like more to it, and all this other stuff that seemed to be going on. These sort of conversations in Zen, in the Zen texts and the Zen koans were just so, unreachable that I just didn't know what else I was supposed to do. And one of the great things about going along was that I was given something very concrete, and they just sort of said, do this. This is called daily life practice, and this is something, we spend most of our time not sitting on a cushion, so most of our time is therefore doing other stuff, and this is how we practice Zen with this other stuff, i.e., with the ordinary aspects of daily life, with the ordinary things that we do. And so we're just given a few things to actually start, but it was amazing how difficult it was to really get started, and it took quite a lot of exposure, multiple exposures before it really began to sink in. And I think this is fairly true for a lot of people. So, there are, basically what I'm saying is that there are many aspects to the Zen training, but in the end they come down to two or three simple and straightforward things. But I think first of all we have to place Zen training in its context, and its context obviously is that it is a Buddhist practice. It's not just Zen, it's Zen Buddhism. And so when we go back and have a look at the early teachings of the Buddha, even though the Zen school is what's known as a Mahayana school, which means the Mahayana was a later development in Buddhism. Still, even the whole of the Mahayana as an edifice sits on those foundational teachings that the Buddha gave, the Four Noble Truths, the Middle Way, the Noble Eightfold Path even. And although the Noble Eightfold Path, strictly speaking, isn't a Mahayana path, it's the Arhat path, the Bodhisattva path is actually based on the 6 paramitas. Don't worry if you don't know what these terms are at the beginning. Those can be looked up at another time. Still, it doesn't matter what the Buddha said back at the beginning about the Noble Eightfold Path and the Four Noble Truths, suffering and the way out of suffering. This is what it's about. And, again, because if we're going to do a practice, we need to know why we're doing a practice, where is it that we're expecting to go. And, the Buddhist practice is called a way. It's called the Buddha's way, it's called the Great Way. It's a journey from suffering to the end of suffering, from samsara to nirvana, if you like, crossing the river of life, if you know the parable of the raft. So there's this, if we're going to go on a journey, we need to know where we're going to end up. And the Buddha's first sermon, what's known as the first turning of the wheel of the Dharma, suffering I teach and the way out of suffering, that is the summation of what it is about. So basically, the Zen practice is a way of helping us with the problems that we face in life. It's there as a support and a refuge, and this is why we have the three refuges: the refuge in the Buddha, his teaching, and in the Buddhist community. And whatever is a refuge is also a support to practice as well. So the Buddha is our example, his teachings we can go back to, and the Buddhist community are the living community of people who are also on the path and who can help us as good friends in the Dharma, as these things are known, as these people are known. So one of the when we're looking at how do we establish a Zen practice, how do we establish a Zen Buddhist practice, the Buddha said originally in that first sermon that there was this Noble Eightfold Path. Now, the Noble Eightfold Path can be usefully categorized categorized into what's known as the three pillars. And these three pillars are the discipline that practice, what's known as Shila practice, which involves ethical conduct, and what we call in Zen practice daily life practice. This is the practice that we undertake in our daily lives. So that's the first pillar, this ethical practice, Shila practice, discipline, daily life practice. The second pillar is the practice of meditation, and that is, it's sitting practice, what's known as Zazen meditation. It is sitting practice, but it's also the skill that we are cultivating that we will also use in daily life as well. So that links the two together. And then the third pillar is known as the pillar of wisdom. And for our purposes, to begin with, that really means a little bit of study. And it also means the insights that arise as a consequence of practice. But initially, certainly, we need to be familiar with the basic Buddhist teachings, those foundational teachings. And we should be also a little bit familiar with some of the writings of the Zen masters, like Master Rinzai, for example, Huineng, the sixth patriarch, very important as well. The stories of Bodhidharma, etc. Master Hakuin, certainly very important figure as well. So is Daito Kokushi as well. These are people obviously in my own lineage, but also in many other of the Zen lineages. Certainly Master Hakuin, sixth patriarch, Bodhidharma, and obviously the Buddha as well. So these are some of the people that we should be, whose lives and sayings and teachings we should also be familiar with. So how does that all break down? Right, so starting with that pillar of daily life practice, the ethical practice. So to begin with, the daily life practice as a practice can be summed up as follows. The root practice is to give myself wholeheartedly into whatever is just now being done. So I'm speaking, I'm giving a talk, and you're listening. So that's what's happening. There's someone is speaking and someone is listening. Now, if we are observant, if we're noticing, if we're a little bit open, if we're what's called mindful, I suppose, to what's going on, we may also be aware that as well as listening taking place, there's also, every so often, there's a little drift off into, some thoughts about, well, maybe what you're hearing. Maybe you're hearing, oh, this is somewhat different to what I read in that book, last week. Or maybe the mind sort of drifted off and thinking about, oh, I mustn't forget to get a pint of milk and some cat food before I go home. Or perhaps, I've got a deadline to finish. How am I going to do that and also go out this evening as well? So the mind may be drifting off and doing other things whilst we're actually trying to give ourselves into the listening. So if our practice is to continuously come back to the present moment, to what at this moment is being done anyway, and to give myself wholeheartedly actually into it. And wholeheartedly means sincerely as well. So really to sort of lean into the activity that is being done. And this is the practice. And to begin with, this practice takes in particular, the body. So why do we take in the body in the first instance? Because the body is always in the here and now. It's rather like when we sit down to do some meditation practice. And I'm going to assume that maybe you've had a go at some meditation. I'm going to assume that you've had a little bit of experience on meditation of the breath, for example. Maybe whether it's meditating on the out breath, putting a count on the out breath and giving yourself into that, whether it's meditation on the awareness of the breath entering and leaving the body at the nostrils. These are all just variations on a theme. The breath is in the body, and the body is always in the here and now. So the breath is always in the here and now as well. So whilst, the thinking may be ranging from the past into the future, and even thinking of the present as well, the body is always in the here and now. And my own teacher, my own late teacher, Venerable Myokyo Ni, she used to say, just pinch yourself in the soft part of the arm. Maybe just, if you can do it without, depending on where you're listening to this, if you can, without drawing attention to yourself, just pinch yourself in the arm. If you can't do that, then simply grab one hand with the other and squeeze it slightly so that you can feel the sensation. And ask yourself, do you need to think to yourself, that's a physical pinch or that's a physical squeeze in order to feel it, or does it just come up into awareness? Well, the answer is obviously it just comes up automatically into awareness. As long as we're pinching, as long as we're squeezing the hand, or as long as we're clenching the toes, then that sensation, that tactile sensation, just simply springs up into awareness. And it springs up to awareness in rupa, in the body. And this sensation has no thinking in it. It is a purely felt thing. This is bare attention, and this is the level that the awareness of the body is always in. And we can always return to that. Because the body is always in the here and now, it's in the present, it can be used as an anchor. So the thoughts may carry me away into thinking, I must pick up some, cat food, or, she didn't, she said those nasty things to me, and she's always saying that, and all that sort of thing. We let go of that when the awareness arises of having once again drifted off into some kind of distractive thought process that carries us off into the past or the future, to simply let go and to come back. And we can, even if you like, we can even just sort of momentarily just clench the toes or clench the hands, just to bring that awareness of the physical sensation into the moment, and then settle into the body. Just really settle into the body. And if we're in a bus queue, or in a queue in the post office, or waiting for a lift, the breath is always with us. We can just take a deeper breath and breathe out. It's no good just doing that once. It's no good just, recollecting to come back into what at this moment's being done 2 or 3 times. The habit has to be formed, and that's a skill. But, as the old Chinese saying goes, a journey of 1,000 miles starts from right under one's feet. So this is the beginning of the daily life practice, and this is what we do. And, we give ourselves, we can also, if we're out walking down the street, instead of thinking 10,000 things and rushing hither and thither, we can just take a moment, slow the pace down slightly. So there's the practice of restraint, which brings us nicely into the body. And we can really give ourselves into the looking and the listening. I mean, whether we're walking or sitting right now, we can just look around our environment, and instead of just glancing very superficially, actually look at things, look at the pattern of the wall or the furniture or the floor. Now, notice how there may be judgments coming up about that. Okay, we notice those internal judgments. Yes, they're there. We let go of them and we go back to the looking. And we can go into the listening as well. We can really sort of lean into the listening. And as we do so, bring the body into it. Open the eyes, open the ears, actually lean into it a little bit as well. So these are ways of really coming back into the moment and cultivating this. We might have to set little reminders and so forth. I used to have a wallet that I put a notice in, a little bit of card that I'd write on something like now or jump, meaning jump back into the moment. And every time I looked at it, then, I remembered to do it. Might be do something a little bit more sophisticated. We're Buddhists, so you could take a little picture of the Buddha and put that in the wallet, or put that into, maybe put it as a screensaver on your phone. Everybody takes the phone out, and when you see the Buddha, yes, you can put the phone back, because now we open up to the world as it actually is. At work, I used to have a little Buddha Rupa just on my computer, on my desk. That also, so every time the eyes looked at it, that would come in too and act as a reminder. So we have this now, giving myself wholeheartedly, but is that the whole thing? Because obviously, if I'm walking down the street, and I see an old lady keel over in front of me, and I say, oh yes, the old lady's keeled over in front of me, and that's been noticed, and then I walk on. Would that be daily life practice? No, it wouldn't, because obviously daily life practice, this giving myself into what at this moment is being done, into the present moment, has to be done within an ethical framework. This is also part of Shila practice. We have the 5 precepts, obviously, to refrain from harm, refraining from taking what is not given, refraining from sexual harm, refraining from harmful speech, and also refraining from intoxication as well. So with those are the 5, what are known as the 5 lay precepts, and they are common to all schools of Buddhism. But that's not the only thing. I mean, those are pretty broad brush strokes, and I'm sure you will, these are just the common human decencies, so there's nothing particularly Buddhist about them. And that's fine. These are the things the world over, that we do in order to, get along with each other. But they still require some restraint. They still require not putting me first all the time. Remember that the Buddha said that this I, me, mine is an illusion, and that the true native state of things is the interconnectedness of all beings, what Thich Nhat Hanh likes to call interbeing. But it's this matrix of relationships that we are it within. And this, by the way, when I say beings, of course this relates to all living beings, but also to the non-living beings that we come into contact with every day. The clothes that we wear, the things that we handle, the food that we eat, the plates we eat off, the pens, the laptops, the bags, the coats, and everything really. All of these things, we are in relationship with, and we handle them with care. We handle them with, a sense of gratitude and respect. And when we look at ethics, really, I mean, there are a lot. You can write down lots and lots of ethical rules, and in fact, the monks and the nuns of various orders can have anything from 10 to 4, 5, 600 rules that they actually live by. And those are things that have just grown up over time. The Buddha himself put together helped formulate the Vinaya. These are the rules of practice for the monks and nuns, and they ran into about 400 or 500. and there have been several forms of Vinaya, or several recensions of the Vinaya, because obviously circumstances change, and the practice taking place in different places and at different times requires slight adaptations to the rules, but the main rules always remain the same. And if you look at those rules, really that they follow, if you like, what has been called the golden rule, which is to be found in all major religions, and has several formulations. It could be do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It could be do not do unto others as you would not have them do unto you. This reciprocity. This is the golden rule. Is the rule of reciprocity. The recognizing that the status of each of us is no better and no worse than everybody else, and so there's an equality in the relationships, which is not to say that everything is the same, because everything is not the same. This is the problem with the do-gooder. For example, which we need to avoid. The do-gooder now thinks, I always eat 2 shredded wheat and have some orange juice in the morning for my vitamin C, and now that's what you must have as well, because it's good for me and therefore it's good for you. That's equality. But it may not be right for everybody, because obviously different beings have different natures as well. Now those natures overlap, obviously, so there's a commonality as well, but there is also difference too, and so this is where the wisdom then comes in, to be able to recognise that all of us are different, but we have equal natures, even though they may not be expressed in exactly the same way, one to the other. This is what's known as differentiation inequality, and those two things exist simultaneously. And it's sounds a bit highfalutin, but it's basically just recognizing that each of us has the Buddha nature, and that the Buddha nature we assist the Buddha nature in all beings, whatever that Buddha nature may actually be. However, that is always done within an ethical framework as well. So we need to have an eye of discernment that can recognize what's known the difference between the Buddha and Mara. Mara is the tempter, if you like, or the one that is the one that promotes delusion. So, so our ethics very much based on that: do unto others as you would have them do unto you, or do not do unto others you would not have them to do unto you. That equality of the Buddha nature within all beings, and those extant rules that we have. Now, the other thing that goes along with that, and again this was something that my own teacher also put a great emphasis on, was cultivation. In the Buddhist formulations, you have the Noble Eightfold Path. You have the Four Noble Truths, and the monks were known. The monks and nuns were known as the Noble Ones, and they would often be referred to as men and women of good family, and so on. Now, actually, this term noble and being of good family doesn't necessarily refer to being born into some kind of nobility class or some kind of aristocrat. In fact, this nobility is not something that is born, it's something that is forged, created through the cultivation of the heart, through the cultivation of the ethical side of life, which obviously the Buddha's path gives us, those precepts and so forth. But above and beyond that, all cultures also have a sense of refinement as well. We meet occasionally we meet somebody. Hopefully we have our own refinements as well, and each culture has that. This is a person who in themselves has cultivated this sense of responsiveness to the needs of others, and awareness of others, is not coarse, is not overly loud, doesn't impose themselves on others, and this refinement requires a great deal of an awareness, but also fellow feeling as well, a recognition of how things are. And ultimately, ethical practice is ethical practice because it reflects the way things really are. If you like, ethics behaviours is ethical when it is in accord with the reality of the situation as it is. And some people have that down to a really fine art. And these are the people, when you meet them, you feel quite at ease in their company. There's a certain energy about these people. They have an ability to be able to, as it were, you feel safe with them because they have a consistency about them. You don't feel that they're just going to fly off the handle or do something completely crazy that makes you feel, that this person, may not be reliable or may not be safe or whatever. So this comes with that sense of refinement. Perhaps the best example I can give is the sort of Confucian practice. The teachings of Master Confucius in China was all about this: the production of a gentleman or a gentlewoman, a person who has that real sense of refinement about them. So this is the cultural side as well. And this is something that comes, through the studying of one's own culture. And again, this is something that we do in Zen. Now, Zen I always remember, just as an example, when doing koan practice with my own late teacher, at one point, the teacher may ask the student to produce a poem or a verse. Normally, what you do, you can, if you're in Japan, for example, you would buy these books of verses that are used. They're called capping verses for koans, but they come from Chinese and Japanese literature. But when she was studying and practicing Zen in Japan, her Japanese master said to her, "Don't use those. Use them from your own European culture, because this is where you come from. This is what's in you. This is what you have been brought up with. And therefore, this will spiritually, this is what will be, the context within which your heart has arisen." And so we always did. We always used whoever came to her, whatever culture they came from, she would always say, if we need a capping verse or whatever, now use the poetry from your own culture, because the poets are the ones who express the insights. That's their skill. Poetry is an inspiration. It comes from an inspired place. Which is not to say that poets weren't mad, bad and dangerous to know. They often were. But they had the skill and the vision to see beyond the surface of forms. Anyway, so our root practice is to give myself wholeheartedly into what at this moment is being done, and within that sort of ethical framework. Obviously, that's the first pillar. The next pillar then is really, cultivating a meditation practice. We have on the Zen Gateway itself, obviously we have a fine video for anybody who wants to learn how to sit Zazen meditation. It goes into all the details about that. You'll find that on the homepage. On the zengateway.com, and to begin with, 20 minutes is fine. Build up to half an hour. Half an hour is in Zen is a standard period. It's the length of a stick of incense in a zendo. They're timed for half an hour. Then we have a little break, staying on our seats, just so we can relax and shuffle a little bit for a couple of minutes, and then we get back into Zazen and we try and build that up to an hour. An hour is a good length of time to sit or to aim for. As I say, don't expect to do that right at the beginning. This is like learning to, taking up sport. You start with if you're learning to run, for example, you run for 15 minutes and then you increase over time until you can run a marathon. Well, it's the same here as well. We start with 20 minutes, build up to half an hour. That's a period, and then we try and build that up to an hour. If we go to regular classes, Zazen classes, sitting as a group in a Dharma center or a temple, might sit for an hour and a half or even 2 hours, for example. That might be the standard thing. When I lived in the temple, it was 2 hours that was the standard thing. And then every so often we have retreats, what are called sessions, where we might sit 8 or 9 hours Zazen a day, not all in one block obviously. It's broken up usually into an hour and a half periods, but yeah, over the period of a day you'd sit 8 or 9 hours. But that's fine. By the time you've reached that point, it's doable, and there's great benefit to be got from that as well. So meditation practice is really just daily life practice, but in a more formal setting. The body is still, so the distractions are really cut down. The outer sensory distractions are reduced to a minimum, and the breath itself, usually in my own school we put a count on the out breath. It'll be a breath-based meditation, what's known as samatha meditation, one-pointed concentration or one-pointed meditation. And this is a practice of restraint, and it holds the energy, it cultivates the energy to stay in the here and now in the body, so that it doesn't leak out into thoughts of I, me and mine, and that produces great resilience in the body, great strength, warmth of heart, and also vision, clarity of vision as well. This is the wisdom side. So that's the meditation practice, the Zazen practice, and finally, obviously, study of the Buddha's teachings. There is a middle way here between in study and practice. As I've said, we had to be familiar with the basic teachings, but once we joined the Zen class, because at that time so many people would just gorge themselves on book after book on Buddhism. Nowadays it's there's YouTube and there's podcasts and there's things like this as well. So we sort of have to be careful not to. The danger is that we begin to substitute study and listening to lectures for practice itself. Because, we go along, we hear a nice Dharma talk, the heart is uplifted, and we can get a little bit addicted to that sort of uplift. And in one sense, every so often we need to do that. Particularly practicing on our own, is hard work. There's so many distractions, and it's so easy not to do it, particularly at the beginning. So yes, at the beginning we do need a little bit more, something to support us, to remind us, to keep us focused, and so forth. But to be careful not to become too overboard. If I find that I'm reading, book after book on Abhidharma and Yogacara philosophy endlessly, then maybe we need to put that down and just pick up a novel instead. So yeah, this is there is another formulation called the threefold wisdom, which goes hearing with the ear, that would mean for us also reading with the eye, pondering in the heart, and then practicing with the body. And the idea is that it has to go through all three stages if it's really going to be learned. Again, as the old Zen saying goes, rather than learning it, get used to it, which means get used to it in the body as well. So yes, those teachings are fascinating, the philosophy is amazing and incredibly profound, but at the end of the day, if it doesn't go into practice, it's not going to be transformative and it's not really going to help us. Okay, well, I think that's probably enough to be getting on with. One could always come back to these things. We can go and have a look at the exercises in mindfulness section as well. Those are always themes that just, we can pick up if we need a little bit of inspiration and something just to sort of practice with again. All these things are geared towards these three pillars, which form a Zen Buddhist practice, as it does every Buddhist practice. And this will give us a good foundation to what we are doing. Okay, we'll leave it there for now.